Imagine being kicked out of a store, not because you did anything wrong, but because someone looked at you and decided you didn't look like a customer. That's exactly what happened to him. He walked into that luxury dealership full of hope, dreaming of something simple, seeing the car he always admired. But before he could even touch the door, he received cold stares, arrogant whispers, until a store employee stepped in front of him and, without even trying to hide it, pushed him away and told him that this place wasn't for people like him. What none of them knew was that this humble man, humiliated and treated like he was invisible, was about to become far greater than anyone who judged him. Because life has a funny way of turning around, and sometimes the people who look down on you today are the same ones who will have to respect you tomorrow. And years later, when he walked back into that same dealership, same doors, same smell, same shiny cars, he wasn't there to apologize and he wasn't there to prove anything. He came back to deliver a lesson they would never forget. If this story already grabbed your attention just from the beginning, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from, because what happens next is simply unbelievable.
He walked into the dealership with a different kind of brightness in his eyes. Not the shine of showing off, but of achievement. On his shoulders, he carried years of hard work, sleepless nights, and humiliations swallowed in silence. That moment wasn't just about buying a car. It was about honoring the boy he once was, the one who dreamed as he watched others drive by, and promised himself that his time would come. But what he found there wasn't welcome. It was judgment. The moment he stepped through the glass door, he felt the air shift. The looks came like blades, as if his simple clothes and humble posture screamed, "Intruder." He barely opened his mouth and was already being analyzed, labeled, dismissed. None of them imagined that the man who looked like anyone carried a war story and was standing at the exact point of his turning moment. He took a deep breath. He wouldn't allow those looks to shrink the size of his achievement. He walked up to the counter with the same steadiness with which he had walked through life, step by step, fall after fall. He knew what he had overcome to stand there, knew the value of every penny saved, of every difficult choice made along the way. When he was finally attended to, more out of obligation than interest, he spoke calmly. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. His victory was already written before any paper was signed. As the salesperson watched him in surprise, realizing he could indeed buy the car, a peaceful thought crossed his mind. The world doesn't always see who you are, but that never stops who you can become. And there, in that space full of filters and facades, he left his mark. Not because of the power of the engine he would take home, but because of the quiet strength of someone who reached a place they said he never would, and who, despite everything, still walked with his head held high. The salesman approached with lazy steps, like someone who sees no potential, no value, no future. He looked him up and down, crossed his arms, and shot the coldest question one could ask in a place that depends on people. Are you here to see something, or just wandering around? The question didn't hurt because of the tone, but because of what it carried between the lines. It was as if, in that bright space filled with gleaming cars, he was nothing more than an inconvenient shadow. Still, he took a deep breath, held back his pride to keep it from spilling over, and answered with the calm of someone who learned to survive contempt. I'm looking for a specific model. It was an old dream, kept since his youth, like someone who stores a fragment of the future inside their chest. But the salesman laughed. Not a polite laugh, but a short, bitter snicker that revealed the verdict even before it was spoken. He shook his head and said, without the slightest shame, "That car is for real customers." The dry sentence echoed inside him. It wasn't just a refusal. It was a judgment about who he was, or rather, who they assumed he couldn't possibly be. It hurt because he knew his worth. He knew every hardened dawn spent saving that money. He knew what he had given up, what he had lost, and what he had earned. But there, no one cared about journeys, about struggles, about merit, only about appearances. And standing there, in front of the salesman who underestimated him, he realized that prejudice costs more than any car in that showroom. Even so, he held his posture, because those who know where they come from and where they're going do not bow to anyone's small-minded gaze. When he calmly insisted on seeing the car anyway, the salesman took a step back, not out of respect, but out of suspicion. His eyes narrowed, as if he were facing someone out of place, suspicious, inconvenient. Then, without hiding his impatience, he called the manager. It was as if they wanted to make it clear, loud and clear, that he didn't belong in that space. The manager came with the posture of someone who has already condemned before listening. Shoulders raised, jaw tense, a hard stare. The first sentence came out like a stone hurled at him. "Are you sure you're in the right store?" The second, sharp as a blade, cut even deeper. "We only assist qualified customers here." He opened his mouth to explain. He wanted to say that he had the full amount, that he had saved for years, denied himself so much, that the car wasn't a whim. It was an achievement, a private trophy. But the manager didn't want to hear anything. He simply pointed to the door with an impatient gesture, as someone who expels an unwanted problem. "You can leave. You don't look like a customer." That was the sentence that stuck with him, not because of the sound, but because of the weight, as if the world, once again, were trying to say that his effort wasn't enough, that his dreams had a limit, that he didn't deserve to occupy certain spaces. He left, not because he lacked money, but because he had dignity to spare. And as he walked away, he felt something ignite inside him. A steady, silent, almost unshakable flame. He didn't shout, didn't insult them back, didn't wish them harm. He simply made a private vow, the kind that needs no witness to be true. That scene would have its return, and when it did, no one there would be able to forget it. On the way back, the memories came like bursts, fast, intense, almost cutting. A childhood of hardship, closed doors, the jobs he accepted even while being treated as invisible. He had felt pain before, but this one struck deeper. Not because of wounded pride, but because of something essential. Because everything he built in life was born of honesty, sweat, and persistence. Nothing had been handed to him. Everything had been earned. And in that moment, something awakened inside him. It wasn't anger. It was focus. It wasn't revenge. It was purpose. The humiliation he had endured wouldn't be turned into bitterness. It would be turned into strength. He understood, with an almost painful clarity, that striking back wasn't the way. The real response would be to grow so much, go so far, rise so high, that the scene at the dealership would become too small to keep up with him. As he walked through that heavy late afternoon, feeling the sun fade along with the day, he made a firm, solid, almost sacred decision. He wouldn't return to prove anything to anyone. He would return to show that no one has the right to label someone who was born to break limits. And as he lifted his head, he felt that the turning point wouldn't begin when he bought the car. It began right there, in that exact step, in that exact choice. In the days that followed, instead of spending that money on the car, he made the decision that would change everything. He invested in himself. What many would have called a defeat, he transformed into a starting point. He met with his accountant, reviewed numbers, reorganized old plans that had been on hold, reignited ideas that once seemed too big for his reality. Now, however, everything made sense. Everything felt possible. He began opening new business fronts, hired professionals, expanded the structure, studied, prepared himself. That episode at the dealership, which could have been a reason for outrage or giving up, became the most powerful fuel he had ever felt. Every word of scorn turned into momentum. Every sideways look became motivation. The company he had built from scratch, with minimal resources and maximum courage, was gaining shape, strength, and visibility. The store threw him out because they didn't see him as a customer. But he was preparing to return not as a buyer, but as someone who would reach a level so high, that they would realize far too late the colossal mistake they made when they judged him by the surface. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about growing, about occupying the space that had always been his, even if the world tried to deny it. Life, in that moment, was merely warming up the stage for the turning point. It moved silently, but with purpose, setting the perfect scene for the day he would return, not to be recognized, but to show that no one can silence someone who was born to go beyond. The months that followed were a true marathon of overcoming. He didn't just work, he reinvented himself. He woke up before the sun rose, while the city was still asleep, and dove into studies, strategies, projections. He mapped trends, expanded his network, closed partnerships that once seemed out of reach. And when night came, even with his body begging for rest, he still found the strength to plan the next day, reviewing goals, reassessing routes, reigniting dreams. His company didn't grow. It exploded. Every signed contract carried the taste of overcoming. Every goal reached was like a silent response to the way he had been treated. And every achievement reminded him of something the world insists on forgetting. No one knows the true strength of a determined heart. He turned pain into fuel, turned humiliation into discipline, turned that rejection into flame. And that flame ignited others. The team felt his energy, the intensity, the clarity, the conviction, and followed his rhythm. He wasn't just a boss, he was a leader being reborn from the inside out, showing in practice that greatness is not born from privilege, but from purpose. Life, generous and surprising, began to open paths he never imagined existed. Doors swung wide open, opportunities bloomed, and he realized day after day that the entire universe seemed to be conspiring for his next chapter. A bigger chapter, a stronger one, an irreversible one. With the company's rapid growth, bigger doors began to open. What once seemed distant now appeared before him naturally, as if the universe had finally recognized the weight of his struggle. An international group of investors, impressed by the company's surprising numbers and the speed of its expansion, requested an urgent meeting. It was ironic. The same man who had once been thrown out for not looking like a customer was now treated as someone indispensable. When he joined the video conference, he noticed it immediately. There was respect in the air. The attentive faces on the other side of the screen, the quick note-taking, the focused silence. Everything showed they were in the presence of someone who had something rare to offer. They asked about his journey, his vision, his expansion strategy. He answered with the calm of someone who knows his own path, with the steadiness of someone who built every step, and with the truth of someone who never needed to invent anything to seem great. He spoke of the difficult beginning, the limitations, the sleepless nights, and the resilience that carried him. And they were fascinated. The investment proposal came as a powerful form of recognition, substantial, generous, transformative. It was the kind of offer that would forever change the level of the company, and his as well. When he signed the documents, he felt something different from what he had imagined he would feel that day. There was no vengeance, no resentment. What there was serenity and a deep understanding. Life rewards those who never give up on themselves. His smile was discreet, but full of meaning. The smile of someone who understands that true victory is never over others, but over all the moments in which we almost gave up. With the capital he received, his company took a gigantic leap. In a short time, it became a reference in the industry. Modern, solid, admired for the human and efficient way it was run. The silent effort he had made for so many years, the effort no one saw, no one valued, no one applauded, now shone in the sunlight with strength of its own. He hired new employees, opened branches, expanded departments, strengthened processes. He invested in training, well-being, and social projects, because he knew, in his own skin, what it meant to be ignored, underestimated, dismissed. His rise didn't erase his scars, it simply turned each one into purpose. And it was precisely at this peak, when his company was appearing in articles, success cases, and receiving constant praise, that he received an unexpected email. An elegant invitation, professional, respectful. They were inviting him to be one of the main sponsors of a major regional business event. One of those gatherings that brought together the biggest names in the market, authorities, investors, and leaders from across the region. He read it carefully, finding it interesting. But when he reached the end of the message, he froze for a few seconds. The chosen location for the event? The dealership where he had been humiliated. He read the address once, twice, 3 times. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't chance. It was destiny. The kind that arrives punctually, precisely, almost poetically. Destiny does not miss. Life does not fail. When it's time to teach, it brings you back exactly to the place where they tried to break you. Only this time, not as someone invisible, but as someone impossible to ignore. On the day of the event, he arrived with firm steps, a calm posture, and a silence that said it all. He didn't need ostentation. He wore a simple, elegant suit, but carried something no fabric could provide: presence. A presence so solid, so assured, that any room seemed to adjust the air when he entered. As he walked through the glass doors of the dealership, he saw familiar faces. The salesman, the manager. The same eyes that had once scrutinized him as an intruder now blinked rapidly, restless, trying to hide the shock that ran down their spines. They didn't recognize him immediately. How could they? The man standing there was not the same one they had thrown out. He was bigger, stronger, more complete. But as the event organizers approached, smiling, shaking his hand, calling him main sponsor, strategic partner, one of the most promising entrepreneurs in the region, the truth started clicking in their minds like a door slamming shut. The realization hit. Astonishment turned into discomfort. Discomfort turned into silence. And silence turned into shame. Pale and restless, they exchanged glances as if reliving a colossal mistake in real time. And all the while, he simply walked, serene, calm, untouchable. No raised voice, no look of superiority, no need to prove anything. Because there, in that exact moment, without saying a single word, he had already said everything. When he was invited to the stage to speak, the hall fell silent in an almost sacred way. He took a deep breath, feeling both the weight and the lightness of the moment, and began to speak. Not as a successful entrepreneur, but as someone who had endured invisible battles that few could survive. He told his story with serenity, no resentment, no theatrics, just truth. He spoke of closed doors, of nights filled with uncertainty, of the times he almost gave up because the world seemed too big for someone like him. He spoke of hasty judgments, of the silent violence of appearances, of how small-minded people make even smaller decisions when guided only by what they see. But he didn't mention names. He didn't point fingers. He didn't expose anyone. He didn't need to. He simply made it clear that many had tried to diminish him, and that if he had believed them, if he had accepted the label they tried to stick on his skin, he would never have been there in front of that audience, sponsoring an event in a place that had once tried to throw him out. As he spoke, his gaze swept over the audience and, for a brief moment, stopped on the salesman and the manager. They were there, seated, shrinking into their own guilt, discomfort written plainly on their faces. They seemed smaller, not because he had diminished them, but because they were being forced to confront their own arrogance reflected back at them. And then he realized something profound, almost liberating. Sometimes, life's greatest lesson is not to humiliate those who hurt you. It's to show that you have grown exactly in the place where they thought you would fall. And when he turned the final key in the box, revealing a new set of documents and contracts, confirming even larger international investments, the entire room fell silent. A heavy, absolute silence that no executive there would ever forget. It was as if time itself had stopped, frozen between the arrogance they carried and the truth that was finally unfolding before them. The young man who had been thrown out of the store, the man who didn't look like a customer, was now there, controlling every moment of that meeting with the calm and precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. Every glance, every gesture, every word left unspoken seemed part of an invisible, flawless symphony. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to humiliate anyone. He did not seek revenge. Reality itself was doing it for him. And in that instant, as the documents rested on the table, silent witnesses to years of effort, sacrifice, and resilience, he realized something profound, almost liberating. Sometimes, life doesn't put you on top for you to prove you're better. Life puts you on top to prove they were wrong. And there, surrounded by the silence of disbelief, he simply smiled. Because finally, the truest justice doesn't come from words. It comes from facts, from courage, and from perseverance that no one can ever erase. The European investors watched everything with a mixture of surprise and genuine respect, absorbing every detail of the story unfolding before them. Every gesture, every word, every document presented carried a weight that went beyond numbers and contracts. It carried the narrative of someone who had transformed adversity into victory. When one of them stood, extended his hand, and said sincerely, "It's an honor to work with someone who built all of this while facing what you faced," he felt a tightness in his chest, a mix of relief, triumph, and quiet pride. It wasn't just recognition, it was validation. The validation that had never come from those who should have seen his worth long ago, but now arrived exactly from where the world tends to recognize true giants, from those who look beyond appearances, prejudice, and first impressions, and see the real strength behind someone who refuses to give up. In that moment, as he shook the investor's hand, he understood something profound. Every closed door, every hasty judgment, Every humiliation he had carried in the past had been the bridge necessary to reach exactly where he was. All he had suffered had not been in vain. All he had faced had given him exactly what no one could ever take away: the certainty of his own worth and the place in the world he had always deserved to occupy. When he looked back at the company executives, he noticed something that would once have taken his breath away. Some were averting their eyes, unable to face their own shame. Others tried to force smiles, shook hands, as if attempting to erase years of contempt with awkward, belated gestures. But he didn't feel anger. There was no room for that. He felt liberation, because true victory had never been about being above them. True victory was knowing that he no longer needed to be there to prove anything, that the value he carried did not depend on anyone else's recognition. In that moment, he understood that real power resided in a clear conscience, in the journey that no one saw, in the sleepless nights, in the days he almost gave up, but didn't. Before those who had once humiliated him, he saw only human beings trapped by their own limitations, still prisoners of hasty judgments, unable to see beyond the surface. And he, on the other hand, had learned to break every barrier imposed upon himself. In that tension-filled silence, he allowed himself to smile. Not for revenge, not for material victory, but for the simple and absolute understanding that no one could ever determine his worth again. He had achieved something that no humiliation could take away: the freedom to be whole, invincible, and immune to the opinions of those who had never recognized him. Then, with a calm that seemed to defy the emotional chaos of the room, he stood up. He adjusted his jacket with a simple gesture, yet one full of authority, and spoke with a firm, serene voice. From today on, this company will change. Not because you want it to, but because it's the only way to survive. Each word fell into the air like an unavoidable weight, measured, impossible to ignore. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to point fingers, didn't need to recount every moment of humiliation he had faced. His posture, the steadiness of his gaze, and the absolute control of his presence spoke for themselves. He was living proof that life rewards those who persist, even when everyone says it won't work out. Every gesture carried years of silent struggle, sleepless nights, difficult choices, and perseverance that no one had recognized until that moment. When he finally presented the restructuring plan, the message was clear. This wasn't about small adjustments or superficial changes. He was there to transform everything from the ground up, from the internal culture to the company's strategic future. And in that instant, everyone in the room realized that this man, once underestimated and humiliated, was not just in charge of a company. He was in charge of the destiny he had always deserved. The executives were stunned to realize that his plan would not only save the company, but elevate it to a level they had never imagined. Every word, every strategy, every detail was meticulously thought out, yet delivered with clarity and ease. He spoke of innovation, social responsibility, respect, diversity, and excellence. Principles many of them knew by name, but had never truly embodied. It was as if he were teaching adults to see the obvious. Companies do not grow through arrogance, but through humility, intelligence, and humanity. Every concept he presented carried the weight of lived experience, personal overcoming, and proof that success is not built on vanity or fear, but on purpose and consistency. And as he laid out his ideas, some began to confront a painful truth. The problem had never been his ability. The problem had always been their inability to recognize it. It was a hard realization, almost humiliating for those who had tried to underestimate him, but there was no escaping it. The truth had become undeniable. And in the silence that followed, reality spoke louder than any argument, louder than any excuse. He was ready, and they had been left behind. When he finished, the entire room rose in applause. These were not forced or automatic claps, but the kind that come from genuine recognition, from true admiration. The kind that, without words, say, "You changed everything." In that moment, he felt something no material possession could ever offer: belonging. He felt that his story would no longer be defined by prejudice, by sideways glances, or by closed doors. Everything that had once tried to limit him now became irrelevant in the face of the strength he had built with his own hands. He had become so great, so solid in his journey, that no external label could contain him again. And as he received the applause, he took a deep breath, not to celebrate, but to thank himself. To thank himself for every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, every humiliation he had transformed into fuel. To thank himself for never giving up. And in that silence between the applause, he understood with absolute clarity: true victory is not in the world's recognition, but in the certainty that you never stopped believing in yourself. At the end of the meeting, the team that had once scorned him approached cautiously, some with downcast eyes, others forcing smiles, all seeking some way, however belated, to make amends for the past. They apologized, sought recognition, tried to show remorse. He watched calmly. He knew how to distinguish genuine regret from fear disguised as politeness. For that reason, he greeted each of them with courtesy and firmness, but made it clear that the past could not be romanticized or erased. He didn't need apologies to move forward. Life's true apology had already been delivered beyond question: his victory. When a manager, visibly uncomfortable, tried to justify the prejudice they had shown years before, saying it was a different time, he looked him in the eye and replied with firmness and clarity: "Times change, but character shows who has learned to change with them." And with that, he not only closed the chapter of humiliations, but also left a silent lesson that no forced gesture could erase. Growing isn't just about overcoming challenges. It's about maintaining integrity in the face of those who once tried to diminish you. As he left the company, he walked calmly to the car they had once refused to let him buy. But this time, the scene was completely different. There was no humiliation hanging in the air, no contempt in the glances, no whispers or silent judgments. There was only the weight of a story transformed into strength and inspiration. He opened the door, sat in the seat, took a deep breath, and looked toward the horizon. He smiled. It was not a smile of revenge, not meant to show power over those who had underestimated him. It was the smile of someone who had conquered himself, of someone who understood that the world turns, that life demands, and that time always reveals the truth. And in that moment, he felt something greater than any material achievement: the full awareness that effort, persistence, and dignity had never been in vain. His journey became a silent yet powerful message to all who have been ridiculed, underestimated, or diminished. No matter how many doors close, if you keep going, one day you will return, not to humiliate, but to prove that no one can stop the shine of someone born to win. And as he turned the key, he felt that every mile ahead carried not just the engine of the car, but the steady pulse of his own story, now indestructible.